Welcome to Counterspin Media. Today is the 28th of July 2021. Joining me in the studio shortly will be longtime historian, researcher and archaeoastronomer Martin Dutre. Now, before we delve into what will undoubtedly be a highly controversial show that will certainly put a few noses out of place, I kid you not, let me update you on a few subjects. So without further ado, let's bring Martin Dutre in now and let's get this controversy underway. Martin, welcome to the show, and let's go. What have we got?
Right, well, one thing that we've seen in recent years is Western democracies have been under assault, and we've seen the erosion of rights all over the world, and at the moment, America is really getting done.
They are.
You know, what is actually happening to them happened to us over the past 30, 40 years. And basically our Treaty of Waitangi, that used to be a document of unification and protection for all of the people of New Zealand, it got nullified, and now it's in tatters, and we don't have the rights that we formerly had. And in fact, we're moving into a situation of what some people might describe as apartheid, or definitely separatism, where we've got two classes of individuals in New Zealand, those who are the elitists and those who are the second-class citizens. And it's all because of what has happened to the Treaty of Waitangi and its true meaning.
And of course, this racial divide has been perpetrated by, like you say, the elitists and then the rest of us. And the rest of us are including brown, black, green, brindle. It doesn't matter, right?
Right. Well, my particular generation, and I'm getting a bit long in the tooth, we can remember when New Zealand was a very together country, and we were getting along famously well. And during that period of time, through the 60s and around about 66, I left New Zealand, went overseas, and I really did encounter, you know, racial problems and riots and a lot of dissidents amongst the population. But New Zealand, when I left, was a very together country. I returned 8 years later to find it really being oppressed, and a lot of our history being erased. And then I saw the complete erosion of the Treaty of Waitangi, and little by little the country changed radically.
You actually have a website with the one of the articles to which you refer. You recently wrote that if people want to go to that website while we're doing the show, you can actually read along and actually substantiate it as we go. If you want to give them the website and how to find it, that'll be great.
Right. Well, I've got a couple of websites, but the one to do with the very long-term history of New Zealand, the pre-Maori history that we all used to talk about, but now has been stripped out of all of our history books.
Not allowed now.
Not allowed anymore. That website is www.celticnz.co.nz. And you'll get many, many articles where we do original research. We go around the country and we visit the ancient pre-Maori sites. Most of them are like solar observatories. There are structures all over New Zealand that were built by the Patupaeatahe and Turihu people who preceded Maori in this country.
Of course, we are going to have a show on that. This is going to particularly focus on Treaty of Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, and documents related to that, and you're not going to want to miss this.
Right. Well, yeah, we saw this insidious thing begin around about 1974, 75, and what it was, we had a treaty that unified the country, and it had stood, the meaning of that treaty had stood for 135 years unchallenged. But then, because of other forces that were moving around in the country at the time, little by little it got eroded and its meaning got completely changed. So what we'll actually get into here is all of the dirty tricks that were used to actually falsify the treaty and dupe the New Zealand public into believing that the treaty actually meant something totally different from what we all believed it meant for 135 years.
And this is the reason why we're having so many problems with the some quarters being called racist and white supremacists, and others being dogged, basically. Good.
Yep. So really, what it was, the big problem, the original final draft of the Treaty of Waitangi in English, the one that became the mother document for Te Treaty o Waitangi, it got lost sometime in February 1840. And that was the cause of the problem 135 years later, where the treaty could be revisited and redefined as to its meaning. But the final English draft of the treaty was found again in 1989 when the Littlewood family were going through family papers of the deceased estate of their mother, and they found this document, which was labelled the Treaty of Waitangi, in a drawer in a sideboard. And it turned out to be, through investigation, we now know that that is the authentic final draft of the Treaty of Waitangi, and it changes everything.
That is definitely something people need to know, because the amount of, how would you say, rubbish being pushed by this government, complicit, of course, by media and academia, as we discussed earlier, definitely needs to have a major light shine on it. And then maybe once we sort that, bring people up to date on what really happened and where we really should be, we can then start putting a putting a sword to this rubbish.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the document that was found in 1989 in a drawer in Pukekohe. It's not terribly long. It goes over 2 pages. For a very long period of time, members of the New Zealand public could not get a copy of this. And if you were, once they found that it was in the public arena, it was found in 1989, but it didn't really come into public notice until 1992. And it was gifted by the Littlewood family to Archives New Zealand, but it was to be kept secret.
Typical.
And thankfully, a whistleblower in Archives alerted the media that this document had been found, and all of a sudden there was like a media sharks feeding frenzy to sort of find out what it looked like. And then the government, the Archives, the Minister of Archives, they had to go into damage control and do all that they could to
discredit
and just throw cold water all over the find.
The usual MO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that, of course, is contained in your book, The Littlewood Treaty.
Yes.
After, of course, the fact that it got found in the by the Littlewood family, and then, like you say, gifted to Archives of where they brought it out, and away you went.
It took 2 years of research to actually write this article, but maybe we could just go into some of the very, very important things that,
so we'll bring that one up.
Yeah, we'll bring that one up. That's good. Yeah. This is what's really happening across the world. Like we have here what you might call the founding document of the United States, and that is the Declaration of Independence. It's only a founding document in that afterwards a lot of blood had to be spilt before they could move on from that to having a constitution and a Bill of Rights. And really the founding document, if you want to call it that, or the permission slip that allowed us to form a colony in New Zealand, is Te Treaty o Waitangi. And the British never really wanted to annex New Zealand and form a colony. All the time through from Captain Cook right through to 1837. But finally, certain forces sort of told them that they had to, start considering New Zealand as a colony. And So what happened is our treaty, which was our permission slip, was nullified 135 years later, and all of the wonderful articles in it that brought unity to this newly formed colony, they were just completely, nullified.
Of course, you've got the argument being taken by some that the Treaty of Waitangi and the English text, the Treaty of Waitangi, are not one and the same, because they don't translate and all that sort of stuff. And people, some say we never ceded sovereignty, or we only ceded governance and all that sort of thing. How do we address that?
Well, what it was, I actually blame it on circumstances that started to kind of hatch around about 1972 with Maturata. And what it was, because of a lot of the problems that were occurring in our society at the time due to, it seemed to me to be instigated by the Polynesian Panther Party, and they were really into Black American attire. They absolutely idolized the Panther Party of the United States, and things that sort of started at that particular point in time led into really undermining New Zealand society.
We just brought them up. These are the people you're talking about?
Yep. Those are the
ones in the US?
Yeah, in the United States of America. And they were people who had experienced slavery. And so they had their own gripes and groans and their need for civil rights or whatever. But here in New Zealand, the Polynesians absolutely adored everything Black American. And so they wanted to be bro in arms with the Black Americans. And so what they did was they conjured up a history under oppression from the British imperialists, a history that had never, ever occurred. And, it grew in force over a period of some years. And then later it started to infiltrate our universities, the unions in New Zealand that were heavily Marxist at the time, most of them leaning towards Soviet communism. They started taking individuals and sending them to Cuba or to China or to the Soviet Union in order to get them to get indoctrination training. And some even got sent to Libya for arms training.
And boy, is that paying off for them now.
Yeah, and what they did, they brought these dissidents back to New Zealand, and they were to cause helter-skelter, to undermine the New Zealand society. And I found that initially Maori didn't take any real interest in what the Polynesians were doing. There was a lot of sort of animosity at the time between the Maoris and the Polynesians. And a lot of my friends who are Maori, they used to speak in very derogatory terms about, what was going on there in Ponsonby.
Yep.
And, so little by little, New Zealand society started to change, and there was a lot of talk about oppression under British imperialism. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, we'll bring up a... do you want to talk about the actual... this document here we're about to bring up?
Yes, the Littlewood document, found in 1989 and gifted by the Littlewood family. Perhaps we can find a picture of the Littlewood family if it's there. So you've got John Littlewood and his wife, his sister, Beryl, were cleaning out the estate of the deceased mother, and they found the document.
Yeah.
And then over the next couple of years, John did everything that he could to, that's him there, that's John, yep. And he needed providence, or to at least to prove provenance of the significance of the document. And he couldn't really get very far with it, but finally he contacted Claudia Orange, who came to his home, and she stated, "Oh, this could be the long-lost Treaty of Waitangi that everybody's been looking for all these years." And then she encouraged him to put it into the National Archives, sort of putting the fear of God into them, that anybody knowing that he had this document, they could break into the home and steal it. So they took it to Wellington and they lodged it with the National Archives. And then, of course, word of it got leaked to the New Zealand public, and that's how the public learnt of this discovery. But for it to qualify as the true Treaty of Waitangi mother document, the one from which Te Tiriti o Waitangi was translated, it had to have certain criteria that proved its pedigree. So the first thing that the archives were going to have to do and promised to do was find out who wrote it. Now, we know from historical records that the author of the final draft of the Treaty of Waitangi, put together on the 4th of February 1840, was James Busby, the British consul that Hobson was replacing. Right. So we were looking for a document that was in the handwriting of James Busby. And if it was in somebody else's handwriting, then it wasn't the mother document to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And that particular information was suppressed for years. There were newspaper articles at the time where the government historians were stating such things as, "We may never know who wrote this." Well, at Auckland Museum and Institute, there's a wad that thick of documents written by James Busby. And so it was something that you could prove overnight, very, very quickly, that he was the author, basically with a glance by somebody who was an expert. So although the document was lodged with archives in 1992, it wasn't until Dr. Parkinson, Phil Parkinson, was walking past the document. He took a glance at it and he said, "Oh, that's in the handwriting of James Busby." Oh. So he identified it, whereas our experts had waited a whole 8 years and never divulged that information to the people of New Zealand. Okay, so now we're on track to prove that this is, in fact, the final draft of the Treaty of Waitangi. So a second criteria that it has to fulfill is it has to say exactly the same as Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It's got to be a perfect translation. Right. So anybody who's undertaking translation work, line by line, whatever is written on this will be translated on that. Yeah. If there are any surplus words, they're not going to be put into the translation. So you can't have the text being topsy-turvy. It's got to be line by line match. Yeah. Now, the other thing is you have to have a clear pedigree for the document found in 1989, going back all the way to William Hobson, the first Lieutenant Governor come Governor of New Zealand. And what it was, the Littlewood family had an ancestor called Henry Littlewood. And there was a tradition in the family that he was somehow, involved in the Treaty of Waitangi. And so we find that Henry Littlewood, who was a solicitor, did conveyancing work for the U.S. consul, James Reddy Clendon. Ah, yes. So the U.S. consul He was actually a British citizen, but because he was servicing the whaling ships coming into the Bay of Islands, and he had a deep water wharf at Okiato where he lived, the Americans asked, "Would you please be our consul? And could you please report on ships that are coming and going, if any of the crews of those ships are causing trouble, any of these sorts of things?" And so when, as U.S. consul, when there was this incentive with Hobson arriving on the 29th of January 1840 at the Bay of Islands from Britain, and with this mission where he was to try and secure a treaty with the Maori people, if New Zealand did become a colony, Clendon had to inform his superiors in Washington, D.C.
Interesting.
So what he did is, and it's really quite amazing, he's a British individual himself. He's got the largest, most beautiful home in the whole of the Bay of Islands. They describe it as an 8-room mansion. Most people were living in a couple of rooms or these, shacks.
Yep.
But he applied as U.S. consul formally to Hobson for a copy of the treaty and translation. So he needed 2 documents. He needed it in English and also in the Maori language. And these were supplied to him.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got a clear pedigree of the document going all the way back to Clendon. And then we've got a document that's being shown here where Clendon made application to have these documents supplied so that he could send them to John Forsyth, the U.S. Secretary of State, telling Forsyth that New Zealand was moving towards forming colonies, the first colony being up in the Bay of Islands, So we've got this clear pedigree going back. And this here is a receipt, I think it's in 1856, where Clendon got Solicitor Henry Littlewood to do this conveyancing work with regards to a deceased estate and charged, I think it was, £3, 3 shillings for the work that he had done. So you show this link between Henry Littlewood and Clendon. So it's got an impeccable history all the way back to Hobson.
So you got a chain of command, basically.
It's a paper trail that's unbroken. Yeah. Now, the reason, one thing I have to add, the Littlewood document, the final English draft of the Treaty of Waitangi, is written on W. Tucker 1833 paper.
Oh, interesting.
So what it is, if you want to find out who was where on particular dates or times, you have to look at the paper stock that things are recorded on.
Yeah.
And the only individual in New Zealand that has ever used 1833 W. Tucker paper stock is James Ready Clendon. So from that, we know that the final English draft was written at the home of James Ready Clendon, because the people who are doing secretarial work or they're doing their business transactions, they have these, they're like a big case thing that you can open up, and you've got your ink wells, you've got your pens, you got your paper.
Little quivers.
Yeah, and I've actually handled one of them that belonged to Gilbert Mayer, Captain Gilbert Mayer.
Nice.
But so what had happened with Hobson is he had been in the Caribbean, and he'd contacted yellow fever there years before. And he arrived in New Zealand as a very frail, sickly man. And so he was very susceptible to having breakdowns, and, he didn't have a great deal of body strength or stamina. Right. And he was aboard HMS Herald, And there was a lot of animosity between him and Captain Nias, who was the captain of HMS Herald. And on a particular night, just after arrival, on the Saturday night, Hobson and his secretary had been trying to write the articles and all of the content for the Treaty of Waitangi, or the proposal that they were going to put before the chiefs. And anyway, poor old Hobson had a terrible argument with Captain Nias on the Saturday night, and it put him into such a state that he ended up with terrible migraine headaches.
Wow.
And so he couldn't proceed, and he was only, 3 or 4 days out from having to stand in full British dignity before all of these chiefs and as the Queen's representative, and tell them, or, deliver the proposal of the Treaty of Waitangi, which, had to be translated into the Maori language.
Yep.
So what happened was Hobson knew he couldn't carry on, and he was floundering. His secretary was floundering. They had gotten about as far as a preamble. They hadn't created any articles yet. So Hobson had the bits and pieces of paper that he had already taken ashore to James Busby, who Hobson was replacing, the British consul, and said, "James, will you please help us? We need you to please write the articles and flesh out this treaty." So James Busby, he realised Hobson was in dire straits, and so he just launched straight into it on the Sunday. And he saw that they had a bit of a preamble, so he started writing the articles of the treaty. And he put a lot of superfluous nonsense in there about latitude and longitude and all this stuff, but at least he was getting into it to some degree. So then he also realised Hobson had to get the hell off that ship because of these arguments with Captain Nias. So Busby brought in his support group, the same support group that had helped him when he was drafting the Declaration of Independence for the Confederation of United Chiefs a few years prior. And those Confederates, those people that were there to help him, were James Ready Clendon and Henry Williams, who had actually been the translator of the earlier document.
Oh, right, yeah.
So then he also realised he had to get Hobson off the ship, and so he arranged for Hobson to go and stay at Busby's little 2-room house, or batch, I guess we call it these days, at Kororareka, across the bay from Paihia.
I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. I'm just nodding.
Okay. All right. So, basically the Bay of Islands is sort of divided up into 2 parts. You've got Kororareka, which is... it became Russell.
Oh, yep, I know.
And then across the bay, you've got Paihia, where the missionaries had their facilities and everything there at Waitangi and near to Waitangi.
The capital was temporarily up there, wasn't it?
Yeah, Russell was, for a year or two, the capital of New Zealand. Yep. But so what happened is they had to build Hobson up now so that he could stand in front of the chiefs and in full British dignity. And so Busby wrote up this, draft that he had, and he took it to Hobson ashore on the evening of the 3rd of February, 1840.
Yeah.
And then they went down to Okiatau and to the beautiful circumstances of James Ready Clendon's mansion, and in that very relaxed environment, the next day, on the 4th, they wrote from the early rough draft notes. They just culled out all of the nonsense, and they wrote up the final draft of the Treaty of Waitangi, the information that they wished to present to the chiefs and have them consider. That document, about 2:00 in the afternoon, left the mansion at Okiatau, was taken by Hobson and Freeman across the way directly across to where the mission station was and home of Reverend Henry Williams and his son Edward Marsh Williams. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Hobson presented this to Reverend Henry Williams and asked him overnight, please translate this into, the Maori Treaty. And that's what they did. And the very next day, of course, it was presented to the chiefs at Waitangi. But it'd be good to actually have a look at the rough draft notes. Now, we're onto the right here.
Okay.
So let's just sort of go through these one at a time. And just to show that amongst the rough draft notes, there is no final draft sufficient to hand over to a translator, so that the translator can make the final translation or proposal that's going to be laid before the chief. So you go through it and you see it's a hodgepodge, an absolute hodgepodge of confusion, and they're experimenting with text and they're crossing stuff out and they're leaving columns at the side where they can add in something if they feel like that. They thought, oh, well, we don't want that, so we'll try that. And so they do this over 16 pages.
Wow.
And you
never hear about that, do you?
No, and this is what historians or treaty researchers have got to look at, go through it and see what it was that Busby finally came up with and what Hobson and Freeman were floundering on and had to actually call upon the services of Busby. And then you see that there is no final draft in there anyway. So we can keep on scrolling on through these. And there are 16 pages of it. And what happened was Busby wrote up his proposal on the 2nd, and then he created a sort of a clean copy on the 3rd.
Right.
Okay. So let's see if we can get sort of towards the end of it. And, okay, that's pretty much the end pages there. That one there is a photocopy of Busby's first attempt.
Right.
And that all got recopied.
We apologise, we're a bit out of order here, and I can see them to my right-hand side. They're scrambling to try and bring it up.
Yeah, right. We're putting him through the ringer, actually, aren't we? Oh, that's good.
Got a team of 3 at the moment trying to make sense and order for the viewers.
Here is your draft notes, rough draft notes, and they go into all manner of things. Like I said, latitude and longitude, and this thing done at Busby had a sort of a bit of a real estate thing going on at Waitangi, and he wanted to call the area Victoria, and he said, done at Victoria, because it would lend a little bit of credence to his real estate thing going on. Yep. Of course, that never got included in the treaty. A huge amount of this never got included. But so here we're kind of getting to the last of it. And then the only document in existence...
No one's able to read today. It's just rapid. We're just going through them to get to the actual points here.
This hodgepodge.
The salient points is what we need.
Yep. So let's now find out what there it is, the final draft, what it actually looked like. So we'll just go back to that.
The one just put prior?
There it is. Right.
You're right over there?
Yeah.
Okay, we're there.
Okay, this here is the only document in existence that would qualify as the final draft of the Treaty of Waitangi, of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the final English draft that became Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And it is absolutely perfect. The situation today, because this got replaced by something called a formal royal style version of the treaty, the whole meaning of the treaty has been deliberately reinvented.
And that was from what year do you pick?
This insidious move started really with the bringing in of the Treaty of Waitangi Act in 1975 with Maturata. But, it's been a very, very sordid history. Now, let's just make some comparisons. That's quite good. We'll see if we can find out if the wording of this final English draft actually existed, or we can prove that it existed in February, March, and April of 1840. So we'll just go to some of the documents that you can still get on microfilm. Now, what happened was Clendon, at the time that the final English draft was written, at his home, knowing that he is U.S. consul himself and knowing that he is going to have to inform his superiors in the United States, takes a copy of it himself, which he couldn't use or do anything with until such time as the treaty was actually accepted by the chiefs, and a certain little section of New Zealand in the Bay of Islands became a colony of Britain. Right. So he took that copy and he would hold on to it, but then he knew that there were certain things that were going to be a problem. First of all, Reverend Henry Williams had said, if there's anything in this draft that you present me with which is not translatable, then it's going to have to be changed. Yeah. And then during the treaty proceedings on the 5th of February 1840, Bishop Pompallier stood up and made a bit of a scene. He was dressed to the T, apparently. He arrived on the day looking absolutely beautiful, and he really made a great impression as he sauntered in, But anyway, right in the middle of Hobson speaking, he got up and he made a point about religious freedom, that he wanted to guarantee that there would be religious freedom so that the Catholic people could, be guaranteed, their ability to practice their religion.
You have a Pompallier High School in Whangarei.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
Catholic school.
Clendon was of the opinion, something might have to be added to the draft. And in fact, what Pompallier, the assurances that Pompallier got are sometimes called the fourth article of the treaty.
Right.
But Busby and Hobson and that considered that the wording was sufficient to cover that, so there didn't need to be a change to that. So when, on the 20th of February 1840, after there'd been a beautiful big printing situation go on at the CMS Mission printer, Colenso, they had a proclamation, they had the treaty in Maori printed. Clendon had sufficient documents at that point to make a dispatch number 6, to go to John Forsyth, but he put a proviso in there saying, well, I don't know if this wording is going to stay exactly like this, because he didn't know about the changes that could have occurred. But when Hobson returns from the southward, I will verify this, that I will find out what the final wording actually came down to.
Yeah.
Okay. So Hobson, he'd been trying to get out of the harbour on HMS Herald for a few days, and during that period of time, he was able to prepare some really big dispatches to go to Sir George Gibson, Australia, and also through to Lord Normanby in Britain. And so he then managed to get out of the harbour. There'd been a wind blowing directly onto the harbour entrance, which just held the ships in there. They couldn't sail out. And actually, because of that, really, that's why later the Bay of Islands was, dished, or, it was discarded as the the capital of New Zealand. They needed a better place to have their capital. Anyway, Hobson then went down to what they called the Thames, which was Tamaki area, to have a treaty meeting there. And so he's down in the southward, and Clendon is waiting for him to return to give him the final English draft of the treaty, so you can see that the wording is all the same.
Yep.
And while at the Waitemata in the Hauraki Gulf there, on the 1st of March, Hobson had a major stroke. He was having trouble with Nias down there.
That's important, isn't it?
That is really, really important.
Piece of knowledge to keep in mind.
Yep. So Hobson now, he's paralysed right down his right side. Now, he was an individual who signed documents with his right hand, and that is really important. Something that actually occurred there in the Waitemata is basically being used as a means of changing the entire meaning of the Treaty of Waitangi.
So this is a pivotal moment.
A very pivotal moment. Because James Stewart Freeman, Hobson's secretary, had been educated at Oxford, Eton in Britain, right? Prestigious schools.
Yeah, we just brought it up for you.
Yeah,
larger,
right.
So people could see it.
And so he felt this need to create memorial documents. So if you're addressing kings or queens or people in high stations in foreign governments, when you write to them, you send them a memorial document and you couch your language in the most beautiful terms. And so what happened was Freeman, after the treaty became a reality, he went back through that hodgepodge of rough notes and he found lovely little words like solicitude and, other pretentious language. And he concocted these memorial documents to be sent overseas. They're called by Dr. Phil Parkinson formal royal-style documents, and they were never to be used in New Zealand. So over a period of several months, I think it might have been up to 5 months, Freeman sent something like 7 of these, and they're all different.
Yeah.
Some have got Freeman's preamble, some have got Hobson's preamble. They vary in wording in one way or another to a greater or lesser degree. And while at the Waitemata, with Hobson lying there in his cot paralysed, it must have been a ship in the harbour that Freeman thought, I'll take advantage of that ship leaving to go to Australia or wherever it was going, to take one of these formal royal-style documents to another destination.
Right.
So he put forward the document for Hobson to sign, but Hobson was paralysed on his right arm, so he executed a left-handed signature, probably while lying flat on his back in the cot, and he executed the most tortured, horrible signature of his entire life.
This one they're about to make bigger for people.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Now, Freeman had put a huge amount of work into this document, and he's got a beautiful hand, so the penmanship is superb. But now the document is ruined by this terrible tortured signature. Now, a proud captain like Hobson, and now a lieutenant governor, because he's got one part of New Zealand, has agreed to form a colony, he would not allow that, a proud man like him, to go overseas, and because it would immediately alert his superiors to what degree Hobson was incapacitated.
Yeah.
So that became rubbish and should have been actually thrown in the nearest wastepaper basket. But obviously Freeman took it ashore when he went ashore on the 4th of March to attend the Treaty Assembly at Tamaki.
4th of March? 4th of March or 4th of February?
No, well, we're now into March.
That's
because
right. Down further. Yep.
Yep.
I know we are.
Because Hobson had his stroke on the 1st of March.
Gotcha.
And so then by either Freeman organising it to go overland to the mission of Reverend Robert Maunsell, or it might have been Captain Gordon Brown, as the HMS Herald was going north on the night of the 4th. Captain Gordon Brown was sailing down, and there were ships passing in the night, one going north, one going south. And Gordon Brown had been carrying a whole lot of documents that had been produced by the CMS mission in Paihia. And these were to be sent over to Robert Maunsell in Port Waikato.
Right.
So it could well be that Gordon Brown, as he came through the area and had to take his boat across the portage, picked up that document as well and took it on to Reverend Maunsell. And Maunsell says that these items that he received had been sent up by the secretary. Well, obviously the things he had received were this defective formal royal style document in English, and also a printed Maori copy that had been produced on the CMS Mission Press on the 17th of February 1840. So these were going to be distributed around to the different treaty assemblies to give to Maori chiefs who signed the treaty, so they could have it in their own language.
Right.
So printed Maori. So you had, this is it here. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yep. So this here, this is the crux of the whole matter, and really what led on to the treaty being falsified by manipulators and social engineers after 1975. This little glitch in the system, and I'll get into it a little bit more.
Good.
Right. So, I saw, I guess you guys have shown a lot of the pictures and that of, I was a Ponsonby boy. I went to Ponsonby School.
Actually, we'll bring a couple of your cameo appearances on stills.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We'll have a look at what Ponsonby used to look like back in the acid tripping throwback days.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so...
oh, look at that. It's quite cosmopolitan, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is. I have a friend. He passed on now, but he was an educator. And the model that they used to use for demographic studies was Ponsonby School.
Oh, wow.
Because we had people from virtually every nationality, and I look in there and I see like little Vivian Chan, who was my jive partner in the class of Mr. Porter, and
she's got a good memory, eh?
Yeah, I'm the little squirt down here in the left-hand corner, and we were all getting along famously well, and there've been video documentaries done by long-term Polynesian residents in the area, who said, like, we thought Ponsonby was like
blow you up a bit.
Yeah, well.
But it wouldn't melt in your mouth.
Yeah. Mm. So, we were all getting along fine, but then, of course, the Polynesian Panther Party moved to town, set up Ponsonby as their headquarters. They were all gang members, or mostly all gang members, and they were mostly the founding members were part of what they called the Niggs gang, but there was also Mongrel Mob, Black Power, all of these gangs. And they came under criticism by the Ponsonby people, the people who lived in Grey Lynn and also Newton, and even their parents or their elders, were trying to get them to cool it because they were sauntering around and causing, a bit of grief. Basically, it was their activities, I believe, that led on to the dawn raids in part. This is just up the road from me. That's the grocery store of the Barner family. And actually, one of the Barners, I don't know if it was this group, but became the one and only member of the Polynesian Panther Party. The other, that there is Max Dairy, where you could get a damn good milkshake. It was really good. Yeah, and that's Lee's Institute, where my uncles, went and were trained as gymnasts before the Second World War. The other part of it was a library. That's the Ponsonby Post Office with the glue pot in the background.
If you want them to slow down, just say Tai-ho a bit.
And that one's, then you've also got the glue pot, and my uncles kept it afloat. I mean, they got known as the Drunkles in the end because of their tremendous contributions to keeping that establishment alive. And the individual in the bottom row in the middle, that's my Uncle Ron, who flew Lancasters during the Second World War. And the individual up to the side is my mother's cousin Tom, who flew Spitfires all through the war. And these individuals, when they came back from the war, they seemed to really need their watering holes, because they'd been through some real traumatic experiences. And, so Ron was a great patron of the glue pot. Now, where the trees are in this picture, that was where I first encountered the Polynesian Panther Party, where they set up a tent. And I went to them, and I could see that at the back of their tent they had posters of Huey Newton, Angela Davis, Rap Brown, who I think he'd burnt down half of Cincinnati. And I said, well...
Black Lives Matter, was he?
Yeah, why do you guys, have these posters of these people? What's this got to do with you? And I talked to a lady who had a beautiful crimson scarf on and the big sunglasses, and she followed me off onto a Maori girl who said she just returned from China, and it was like going back to the marae, and, and over, you can go to the next picture if you like. This is a documentary from Polynesian people who remember Ponsonby before it became Polynesian Panther territory, and they state in their documentary how we were all getting along so well. Things started to fall apart a bit after the Dawn raids in 1974, but before the gangs arrived in town, we were getting along just fine. Yeah, and...
who's that?
Oh, okay. Well, in our original home, you can see our Chrysler car parked outside the house, and that was our taxi to the beaches and our recreational vehicle, and it was always loaded down with a grandmother and a great aunt and also a dog and, 4 kids and mum and dad, But, I always liked the cars, and now I sort of collect them a bit. And that's what the house used to look like, and that's what it sort of looked like in more recent times, but it's getting another big revamp at the moment. Anyway, basically what I'm saying is I have a lot of experience of what happened in Ponsonby. I saw it all unfold, all of the strutting and posturing and, these accusations of British imperialism and the adoption of this fake history that had nothing whatsoever to do with the Polynesians, but how it then spilled over. I was so surprised it had the roll-on effect that it had. And before too long, Maori, who'd shown no interest whatsoever, started to jump into the game. And then they started up with these accusations of, oppression under the British, which I'd never heard years before as a young carpenter living in Maori communities. And I saw everything changing before our eyes. So the outcome of it all was that Maturata, who's seen in this picture with the Queen at Waitangi in 1972, he got into the game. He could see some of the advantages of going along with, how the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Yeah.
So he started bringing in a tribalist agenda, And his mission was to bring in an English version of the Treaty of Waitangi to sit alongside Te Treaty o Waitangi and be co-equal to it. Now, that's a very strange thing for a Maori individual like Maturata, because you'd think, well, he would be absolutely proud that the only treaty wording that existed was Te Treaty o Waitangi in the Maori language. And if you get a translation of Te Treaty o Waitangi, it's a very fair, totally egalitarian document. It's for everybody. And it says in Article 2 that the rights of the treaty go out to kina rangatira, kina hapu, kina tangata katoa, anutarani. Yeah. So to the chiefs and the tribes and to all the people of New Zealand, which you don't hear these days.
No, there was, can we leave that bit off?
So that was a really inconvenient thing to have in there. And so he wants to bring in another version of the treaty, a version in English. Right. Okay, so he had some choices. He could have brought in the 1869 version of the treaty, produced by the Native Department and commissioned by the New Zealand government. By 1869, the government, knowing that the final English draft had been lost and that everybody and their dog, if they wanted to know what the treaty said, had to do a back translation of it, they wanted to have an absolutely official one produced by the Native Department that they could use when they were deciding upon legislation, you know, the drafting of laws and all of that. Okay, but Maturata didn't want that one. He wanted a formal royal-style copy.
Do we have that? Do we have that in our archives there?
Well, the one he wanted was the one with Hobson's defective signature on it.
That one there?
That one there.
That's one he wanted.
That is the wording that he wanted.
Right.
Okay. Now, why did he want that one?
Good question.
Well, it's because it's got mention of forests and fisheries in it, which didn't come into Te Treaty o Waitangi when the final draft was written. But also in Article 2, it says that the rights of the treaty are to the chiefs and tribes of New Zealand and to the respective families and individuals thereof. No clear mention of the settlers. Now, I guess you could interpret it, as I think some individuals have in government, when you talk about the chiefs and tribes of New Zealand. Well, there is a tribe called Ngāti Wikitoria, right? So the tribe of Queen Victoria, right? So in that respect, the English settlers are, you know, included, but it's not that clear. But whereas Te Treaty o Waitangi is very, very clear to the chiefs, you know, to the chiefs and tribes and to all the people of New Zealand. So he managed to get that into legislation in the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go into what actually happened at Port Waikato as we proceed. But when he finally was able to bring this very defective English version into our legislation, based on obsolete rough draft notes and not the final draft of the treaty, and based on a document that was not the official government back translation of the treaty produced in 1869.
And that was the Native Department?
By the Native Department of New Zealand, under commission from the New Zealand government. That's the one. If he wanted an English one there in our legislation, that was the only one that he was really technically supposed to have.
Yeah.
And it's fine. It mirrors the Littlewood document perfectly. You know, slightly different wording, you know, but that's every translation that anybody does. They're going to put in a few different words, but the intent and the meaning was exactly the same. So anyway, once he got that document into our legislation, he says, "Oh, look, this must be the English understanding of the treaty. Oh, look, it says forests and fisheries. Oh," and then what he would do, he started to muddy the waters. He and his cohorts muddied the waters, and what they had done is they had pushed Te Treaty of Waitangi, the only legal Treaty of Waitangi wording, aside into the shadows forever, and totally replaced it with a whole new wording. You imagine what the hue and cry would be in the United States if somebody came along and said, "Oh, we don't really like your Constitution. It's a little bit too fair. But look, we're going to put in this new one, and we've just shoved this one aside into the shadows, and you can kiss that goodbye along with all of your rights."
Yep. They would be up in arms.
Yeah, they certainly would be up in arms.
Probably why they're taking all of ours off us.
I think the vigilantes would be in the streets pretty quick. Yeah. So, but that's effectively what he did. Now, not only did he do that...
So basically, before we go on, because we can keep people with us.
Yep.
So the current Treaty of Waitangi, the English version, is a fraud.
It's a total fraud, and it is what defines what the Treaty of Waitangi says and means these days.
Exactly. Now, here's where a lot of people are getting confused out there. Because a lot of the people jumping up and down saying, what about our fisheries, forests, birds, all that sort of stuff, they're saying that the English one is the translation of the Māori one, which we know it's not, right? Because you're about to present evidence that it isn't. So how do we sort of educate these people to show that there is no division? It was always meant to be one people moving forward. And yet you've got antagonists on both sides. Basically, it's a money making. It's a printing press, isn't it? The 1975 Treaty of Waitangi has become a printing press.
It's a cash cow. Yeah.
Totally. And the everyday Māori or European or whoever, Chinese, Samoan, Tonga, it doesn't matter. None of them are benefiting. You just got to look at the record homeless. You just got to look at the amount of charities out there trying to feed people every day. Government's failing because they keep taking what should be spent on the people and putting it in their pockets.
Right, and it's only really the Maori elite of today who actually benefit.
That's right.
And there's no trickle down, or very little trickle down that I know of, that goes to the tribes, to the iwi.
But now they're pretending with He Puapua. He Puapua,
and they're bringing that in. That's the next big move, to absolutely have complete domination over New Zealand by the year 2040.
Yeah, well, we'll make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, but you talk about Hobson's intent. As each chief signed the treaty on the 6th of February 1840, coming forward, Hobson extended his hand and said, "He iwi tahi tatau. We are now one people." And if you look at the preamble of the treaty, if you look at other sections of the treaty, it's all about becoming one people, and we're all British subjects under the guidance of Queen Victoria.
One nation, basically.
One nation. Now, they try and argue, okay, here's a dirty trick that they pulled. Like I said, the Maori version says that the rights of the treaty are kina rangatira, kina hapu, kina tangata katoa nutarani, and then it goes into te tino rangatira tanga. Okay, that goes on to that. Now, what it actually means in this area...
right at this point, you're going to have Māoris out there saying, what's that white guy trying to tell us what that really means?
Okay, well... Okay, I'll tell you what tino rangatira tanga means. First of all, what the Queen, what was said in the treaty in Article 2 is that when the Queen, forms a colony, you will not have to forfeit your land or any of your goods to the Queen. Basically, the queen's shadow goes across the land and you sit in the shadow of the queen.
Protected.
And you're protected by the queen, but you're also subject to all of the advantages and disadvantages. If you, commit murder or whatever, you can be hung, under the law.
So you can't eat your neighbour.
Yeah, you're not allowed to do that. No.
Makes sense.
Right. So a lot of the activists stated, well, this tino rangatiratanga is a very, very big word in Maori. It means chiefly rights of succession. But it's not used in that way. It's just used that the chiefs and the tribes and all the people of New Zealand will hold on to their goods.
Yep.
It just means possession. But they basically could pluck that from Te Treaty of Waitangi and kind of shove it into the English version and make it mean the rights of succession of the chiefs. And that, in other words, oh no, the chiefs didn't give up their sovereignty. All they did was allow the British to be governors or see to their affairs.
Some say it was like the country's first immigration document, where they allowed people in. Never mind us Irish Scots, who weren't under any queen anyway, but free agents really.
Like, okay, so another thing they said was, we see this word here, kawana. And it means also they have kawanatanga. Yeah. The kawana. What is kawana? It's governor.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's basically another one of these words where, Maori have changed it, or they're saying it the way they can say it, It's a bit like the name Hone is John, or Arapata is Albert.
But you'd think if they're going to say John, they'd say Hon. You know what I mean? Not Hone.
Yeah, Hone. But anyway, you see, that's the thing. Yeah. Every Maori word has got to end in a vowel.
Wow.
Yeah, So that's why they had to have Hone.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. But anyway, so they said, that word that Reverend Henry Williams has used for sovereignty, no. That's not adequate enough. He should have asked the Maori chiefs for their mana or manatanga. Well, mana, it's a person's self-pride. It's based on their prowess in battle as great warriors. It could be based on their royal lineage from great ancestors.
So why would anyone give that up?
You can't give it up.
Exactly.
And no one asked the chiefs to give it up. They needed a word that would sort of encapsulate, if you like, the authority that the governor would need or the queen would need in order to bring about laws in New Zealand.
Yep.
So let's have a look at it. Kawana, governor, right?
Yep.
The printing press, the CMS Mission printing press, was constantly producing literature. They were pumping out a hell of a lot of literature and basically thousands of items. And Maori loved all of this printing, and they grabbed every book as it came off the press pretty much. And then they had individuals in the iwi, like Hone Heke, who were good speakers of English, and they could get, say, the Bible, which was in the Maori language, and they could have somebody read the stories of the Bible to groups assembled, sitting around and listening. And of course, one of those stories had to do with Jesus Christ and Pontius Pilate.
Oh, right.
Now, Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea. And so Maori could fully understand that over Pontius Pilate was this great rangatira, who was Julius Caesar, coming down to Pontius Pilate. And then below him was another hierarchy, which was the Sanhedrin of the Judean people, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, King Agrippa and the royals. But over them was Pontius Pilate. So if any of these guys stepped out of line, Pontius Pilate could have them crucified if he wanted to. So that they understood the hierarchy. Queen Victoria coming down to Hobson, the governor, and then you had your tohungas and you had your chiefs and your kamatuas and your learned elders and all of them.
Yep.
They were under the new governor. Right. And that's the only way it can work, because the Queen does not enter into partnerships with anyone.
That's right.
The Queen is the sovereign. And, it's an absolute impossibility under the Magna Carta or on the Bill of Rights or anything like that to water the whole thing down, where the British are only here to work for the Maori chiefs and keep law and order.
Yeah. I've always been astounded, okay? I've always wondered, if it's such a sore point, why Māori didn't ask the Queen herself to make a public statement as to exactly what it all meant. You notice that? You notice they've been silent on that particular request? Would you not say, Queen, back us up? What we said here is true, isn't it? And that would have settled it right then and there, but they never did.
Well, they understood it perfectly well, what had actually happened. But
you're talking about the change, and that's the reason.
Yeah. What had happened with Maori in we had that period of time with Busby came in. What had happened is Maori had slaughtered the crew of Marion Dufresne, and then they were very worried about French reprisal. So they wrote to the King of England at the time in 1841, and they said, would you be our protector? Yeah, we are very worried about the tribe of Marion. Right. So they even got a Union Jack, and they put it on the headland, I think it was of the Bay of Islands. And anyway, because of this letter to King William, Busby, who was a person producing wine in Australia, he was sent to New Zealand to be a consul. So he arrived, and basically it was kind of like the British were saying, oh, if you internationalists want to wage war with New Zealand and overwhelm it and take over, then it's over my dead body, So then Busby, he wrote up that document he didn't really need to, called, the Declaration of the Confederation of United Chiefs.
Declaration of Independence, 1835.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
And they even got a flag, which is basically the Shaw Savile flag.
Wow.
Yeah. And,
I didn't know that.
So that all these things, And, but unfortunately, by 1837, Ngāpuhi were fighting amongst each other. And a war was going on between Pomare and Titore, and Titore ended up getting killed in that, and the settlers got caught in the middle. And at that point, Hobson was sent in from Australia on HMS Rattlesnake. They seem to have these funny names for their ships at the time. And he had to kind of quell the war and get everybody at peace again. And then he wrote a great big document, for goodness sake, form a colony in New Zealand, because Maori, the missionaries, all sorts of people had been petitioning the House of Lords or through to Britain to form a colony. But the British didn't want anything to do with it. There was nothing really down here that they wanted as such. One thing that was good was Cowrie, because you could go to the Battle of Trafalgar and you could have a mast that was 10 feet higher than all the French masts. So you could get a little bit more
wind.
Yep, that kind of thing. But what the attitude is that here's Britain up here, and as the French would say, New Zealand is l'autre bout du monde, right down here, you're half a world away.
Yeah.
And it had a lot of internal problems of the warfare between the tribes and all of that. And it was only Sir George Gibson, Australia, who finally said, for goodness sake, form a colony in New Zealand, because the French are making a move on New Zealand, and I don't want a traditional enemy of Britain poised so close to Australia that they could use New Zealand as a staging area for, attacking Australia. So that was really the deciding factor. And when I was going through archives and looking at a lot of microfilms and pieces of paper out of, the British parliamentary papers, or, just letters that were sent between departments, there was one that said, Hobson has just been sent to New Zealand to secure a treaty with the Maori people.
Yep.
If he fails, we will never try again. Yeah, well, if you want to talk a little bit about the Declaration of Independence for the Confederation of United Chiefs, that was kind of an incentive sort of written up by James Busby when he came, and then translated by Reverend Henry Williams and co-signed by Clendon, James Reedy Clendon.
So who initiated it, Martin?
Well, really it was Busby, and a lot of people have criticised him that it really wasn't essential to do something like that, but I guess Busby thought, well, I've got to make some kind of a declaration, or foreign nations are going to come in and just annex New Zealand, or something along those lines. He thought it would protect them.
I thought it was important that people know that it was actually not initiated by Māori, like some claim.
Yeah, well, yeah, Busby's received quite a lot of flack about that whole thing. But the thing is, by 1837, the Confederation of United Chiefs were at war with each other, and people like Tamati Wakanene and his son, at least his brother, Patuone, said, enough of this. We've got to move to a whole new situation, which is a colonial government under Queen Victoria. And they were scared of the French, like we've mentioned a bit earlier, and they wanted to sit in the shadow of the Queen. They were fragmented at the time because they had internal fighting. The tribes in the south were rearming to come and deal utu to them for Hongi Hika's sort of trips down country all the way to, I think, Charlotte Sound, waging war and paying back utu. Anyway, so later Hobson was able to get the treaty, secure a treaty with the northern tribes. And he said, looking at Treaty of Waitangi, this instrument I consider to be de facto the treaty, and all signatures subsequently obtained are merely testimonials of adherence to the terms of the original document. And then he said, well, this number of the signatories of the Declaration of Independence of the Confederation of United Chiefs have now moved to the treaty.
Confederation of Chiefs of United Tribes of New Tarini.
That's the one.
Yeah, making sure we correct that because we'll get flack otherwise.
Absolutely. Anyway, so they had moved their position from this to this. And Hobson, made the thing, I consider this to be de facto the treaty.
Yep.
They had definitely made a move from one position to another. And so basically the declaration became a kind of a non-entity. It had served its purpose, and it had come to an end.
Welcome back to Counterspin. This is part 2 of a previous episode, which was episode 19. If you've come fresh into this episode, please go back and watch the previous one to see how it all ties together. We are discussing the great Treaty of Waitangi fraud that's been pushed upon this country and caused a lot of division, a lot of angst amongst everyone, because to be honest, no one knows what the hell's going on with it. And we're bringing facts and evidence to bring you up to speed on what really should be the current situation here. So before we get back into that, and I bring back Martin Dutre to continue to drop the bombs and bring us all up to speed, we're going to play the same video that we finished with last time, which was just after we got heaps and had to get instructed by the producer because we were getting a bit wayward. So let's watch that, and then we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to Counterspin. Joining me in the studio is Martin Dutray. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. Part 1, episode 19. Please watch that if you have not done so before we come here. And the article to which we are alluding to or discussing in these shows, we will bring up now. You can find it on www.celticnz or celticnz.co.nz, should I say. Look up articles. And then it's the top one, part 1 and part 2. That's where you'll have all the evidence we're talking about here, explained in great detail, proving that the 1975 Treaty of Waitangi Act and the document to which it alludes to is a complete and utter fraud. And, of course, it's exacerbating with the introduction of Hei Puapua and the grievance treaty claims just go on and on ad nauseum. So, Martin, welcome back.
Good one.
If you can give them a quick rundown of where we were before. Remember, you'll be watching this on or about the 1st of August, so don't think we haven't changed in a week or had a shower. No, you still smell pretty good there, Martin, because this was in 2 parts and we did it on the same day for you. So there you go. Martin, can you explain to everyone where the fraud is? We'll drop the evidence. We'll drop all the facts, because we are a fact and evidence-based show, of course. Mm-hmm. And, of course, during this, we will lay the challenge out to anyone to try to disprove what we're saying. Every time we've done this, Martin, every time we've asked people to prove us wrong, crickets, nothing, no one ever comes. Getting pretty lonely.
Right, well, we have a paper trail for everything that we're talking about. In other words, when a historian needs to establish facts, and say you find a document like the Littlewood family found in 1989, you then have to find out if that document has a pedigree. It's got to go back to a source.
Correct.
And what we've established, I think, in a jumble of many concepts through the first part of this, is that there's definitely a great pedigree, a fully established pedigree for the Littlewood document found in 1989, going all the way back to a solicitor in the 1840s called Henry Littlewood, and then it goes back to Consul Clendon, who asked for a copy of the document from Hobson, the Lieutenant Governor of New Zealand. So we have a totally established pedigree. And I've been asked to sort of comment a little bit about how I got into all of this. What happened is in 1966, I left placid, tranquil, together New Zealand and went overseas for the big OE, as so many people did. And then I returned 8 years later and I found New Zealand wasn't really New Zealand anymore. We had all of this internal strife and people posturing and marching and, we had basically brought in from overseas all of their gripes and moans, everything to do with the Vietnam War, the civil rights stuff in the United States, and New Zealand was really a bit volatile at the time. Anyway, I also noticed that our history was being changed. Like, I'd grown up knowing that there were pre-Maori people, and if I had have ever said to my grandmother, I think there were people here before the Maori, she would have said, of course there were, everybody knows that. So our history books were replete with references to the Patupai-Arahe, the Turihu. Quite often people put them all under the umbrella term Moriori or something like that. And but I noted at the time this Marxist move to completely get rid of our history books. And so the works of Elsden Best or Edward Tregear or James Cowan or even Sir George Grey, who was a prolific writer of, the pre-Maori history based on the oral traditions that have been brought down, through the Maoris about the Tangata Whenua people, the people who had been there before, described as Urukehu Kiripufero, that they had a very light complexion to their skin and they had red hair, blonde hair, blue eyes, a lot of them.
Sounds like my peeps.
Yeah, well, this was all getting stripped out of our history books and I was wondering why. And I kept waiting for our academics to come back and rectify the situation. But they weren't doing it. And we had these people marching around saying, oh, we don't read that history anymore because it's Eurocentric or it's ethnocentric. So they had all of the Marxist buzzwords to get completely rid of our established history, which was written from the dawn of the colonial era right on through, and mostly based on the stories that were passed down by the tohunga, the elders of the Maori people. Okay. Also at the time, we had leftover groups of the earlier people that we called the Waka Blondes. And so I tried to keep that history alive. I tried to refer back to it when it was being
decimated.
Yeah, and it was like we were being enveloped by a kind of enforced amnesia, where we were forced to forget our history that was the established history for the last 135 years or so. Anyway, the academics weren't doing anything about it, so I began to participate in that to some degree. And in the course of doing that one time, I had a down-the-mouth letter come in from a Maori gentleman who said, Martin, you white racist, why don't you tell the people about the Treaty of Waitangi? And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. It was a really horrible subject. We were getting bludgeoned severely over the head by the Treaty of Waitangi. But I thought, oh, well, a challenge is a challenge, so I decided to get involved. Now, I remembered a TV program where, this was in 2003 by this point, I remembered a TV program where a lady called Beryl Needham was standing by a bush, and this document had just been found in her mother's deceased estate, and they were talking about it. And then there was a lovely little splash on TV about it. Then everything went silent. So, okay, I had a challenge to find out about the Treaty of Waitangi, and I remember the speculation earlier that the final draft of the Treaty of Waitangi might have been found back in 1992. So I got on the phone and I called up the Littlewood family, and I think it was the first try I got them out at Manurewa. From then on, I was able to go out and meet with them many times, and they were wonderful, gracious people. They gave me copies. I had to go digging for them because the Littlewood Treaty was just about totally forgotten now, the document they'd found. And they had to go digging to see if they could find it. And I got photocopies of it, and then I got some of the family genealogy and histories, and that led on to many discussions and also to learning a huge amount. And finally, it tweaked when I got through a document that was just in-house in archives, that the author of the Littlewood document was James Busby, the British consul. And then I knew, hey, this is very significant because we know that on the 4th of February 1840, he had acted as the secretary to actually pen the dictation of Hobson, and they had worked out the final draft of the Treaty of Waitangi, the mother document that became Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And so I later found out that the pedigree was perfect all the way back to Hobson, that Hobson had lent the final draft to James Ready Clendon, the U.S. consul, so that he could send a copy to John Forsyth, the American Secretary of State. And then, unbeknown to Clendon, after he'd sent his dispatch, a guy by the name of Commodore Charles Wilkes, who was the head of an Antarctic expedition and a flotilla of, I think it was 5 to 7 ships. They had gone down into Antarctica. They'd been beat up by the ice floes and icebergs, and they had been told, go to the Bay of Islands if you're in trouble. And so there were 2 ships in the harbour. that were badly battered and undergoing repairs. And then the USS Vincennes, the flagship of the fleet, came into the harbour, and Wilkes, to his great joy, found that two of his ships were there. They hadn't sunk after all, and they were undergoing repairs. So he also wanted a copy of the treaty in English and the treaty in the Maori language. And they happened to be in the possession at this point of James Ready Clendon, the U.S. consul. So Clendon gave them to Wilkes, or at least Wilkes came to Clendon's home and transcribed them. And in the course of doing so, he meticulously copied spelling mistakes within the document. And what had happened is James Stuart Freeman, Hobson's secretary, earlier on had spelled the word sovereignty wrong in a document. And anyway, somehow this affected Busby, who wrote some of the final drafting stuff of the treaty, or was the major contributor, and before it turned into the final draft. And so he had copied sovereignty wrong as well, leaving out the telltale E. But also the word ceded had been spelled wrong, where they'd thrown in an I. And then there was another spot where Busby was supposed to write chiefs in the final English draft, but at least Queen, but he wrote chiefs instead and then had to cross it out. So Wilkes meticulously copied every spelling mistake that Busby had put in there. He was a little bit hurried in a little area at the top, and he left out the first sovereignty, and he put in it instead, I can't quite remember it now, but a slightly different piece of text. But he recovered from that, and the rest of it was perfect. So we know from this that what Wilkes had in his hands on I think it was the 6th of April, 1840, was exactly the same document that had been found by the Littlewood family in, 1989. So, we know that it has existed despite all of the spin since February, March, and April 1840, and that the works of Wilkes, the work he did, he not only sent a dispatch of it to his superiors in Washington, D.C., but he recorded everything in the dispatch into the USS Vincennes letter book. So we got two copies of it. And so these copies of the totally proven final English draft, the mother document of Treaty of Waitangi, has been there for all these years. And you can go and view them on microfilm at the Auckland University and various other centres around the country.
Until they watch this, and they'll probably try to get rid of it. Explain to people what we've got up there now.
Right. Well, what happened? In 1975, with the Treaty of Waitangi Act, Maturata wanted to bring in a English version of the treaty that would replace, would have equal authority in his, the way he said it, to Te Treaty o Waitangi, which was a very strange thing for a Maori gentleman to want. But he only wanted to bring in something called a formal royal-style copy of the treaty. Now, this was only for overseas dispatch. It was based on rough draft notes. It was a memorial document that you would send only to high positions in the realm, royalty, and it had to be a memorial document, sort of like poetry, in very, very pretentious language. But now or after 1975, they have done everything in their power to convince us that Reverend Henry Williams and his son Edward Marsh Williams used this text to create Te Treaty of Waitangi, which is an absolute impossibility. First of all, no translator will put into a document that he or she is translating that aren't in the original document. And we've got things like Kingdom, Great Britain, United Kingdom, or Ireland, Europe, Australia. Those are just some of the phrases or words. And then you have full phrases which never made it through to Te Treaty of Waitangi, forests, fisheries. It's a total hodgepodge. It's far too long, and it's got far too much extra superfluous text that no translator would have translated through to Te Treaty of Waitangi. If Maturata wanted a text in English to sit alongside Te Treaty of Waitangi and be co-equal to it, he should have used the translation that was made by the Native Department in 1869 as commissioned by the New Zealand government, when the government decided that because the final draft of the treaty had been lost sometime in February 1840, that they needed a text for reference for their legislation. Okay.
So up here, audience will be looking at that. The very long one is the fluff, fraud.
That is absolute fraud. What Maturata was able to do was completely eliminate our only valid Treaty of Waitangi in the Maori language that it had to be in, and replace it with a completely new text that he could tamper with and that he could add to and that he could reinvent. It was a case of muddying the waters so he could basically initiate or bring in what we now know as the grievance industry.
Which is actually quite ironic when you think about it, because remember, a lot of Māori out there say they subscribe to the United Nations position that any conflicting treaty between two nations, it is the text in the native language that takes precedence. So we're sort of hoping it does take precedence, aren't we?
Well, absolutely it does take precedence. And Hobson said to the emissaries who were going out to do treaty presentations around the country that it had to be given or transmitted in the Maori language. Yeah. And he said, you will not let anyone sign the treaty who does not understand it. So that's exactly what he said. And then you've got the words of the missionaries themselves, Reverend Henry Williams. He, after the meeting on the 5th, he had to go to Titi Marae, and all through the night they went over the Maori wording back and forth and explaining everything until everybody was crystal clear as to what the treaty truly meant, what the consequences would be in ceding sovereignty to Queen Victoria. So they came on the morning of the 6th and they ended up signing the treaty.
And of course, you've got a whole generation now who have been brought up on this. And these are the ones marching the streets, saying white privilege, adopted the Marxist ideology of cancel culture, of completely destroying our real history. Mm-hmm. And ironically, it's actually one of supposedly their own that have taken them for the ride.
Well, the thing is, over the years, we've constantly heard, honour the treaty, honour the treaty.
And we've been trying to.
Well, our people have honoured the treaty, but activists and dissidents and greedy people, grievance industry people, have dishonoured the treaty. They've taken that wonderful gift that the chiefs in 1840 gave to all the people of New Zealand, law and order and an egalitarian society where we were all subjects of Queen Victoria. We had all of the benefits and obligations that went along with that. And we had a very, very successful country right up until all of this nonsense was foisted on us.
Yep.
Yeah.
So settlements of 1975 have been a long process.
Mm-hmm. Right, and yes, also all full and final settlements with Maori were completed under the Fraser government in 1944 and 1975. And what the last one was, or at least the 1944 one was a settlement to Naitahu, and we have it right here, written up at the time, the full and final settlement with Naitahu. And the agreement was that payments would be made for a 30-year period of so much per annum. And that all came to the end in 1974 when Maturata was the Minister of Maori Affairs. And with the stroke of a pen, he put down in perpetuity. In other words, this payment was to go on ad infinitum. Okay, now, the roll-on effect of that was that all sorts of other things had to be addressed. And we had a professor, Michael Belgrave of Massey University, who wrote a book in 2004. He said most New Zealanders would be very surprised to learn that all of the grievances before the Waitangi Tribunal at the moment have already been settled by this means or that means. There was really very little or nothing left.
Yep.
And the Longi and Palmer government even consulted with Richard Hill to have him write up, well, are there any outstanding settlements with Tainui and all that? And so Hill wrote a report showing that, ostensibly everything was cleaned up. But what happened? We had to, everything got put into retrospective
always
claiming, and we had to go all the way back, and it just opened this Pandora's box of claims that had already been settled, in some cases up to 8 times in the past. Taranaki is an example. It was fully purchased from Te Kuiti and Te Rauplaha in 1839 by the New Zealand Company. But then Te Wharawharo of Manukau turned around and said, why did you pay those guys? I conquered them. You owe me. So then Hobson had to go to Te Wharawharo and he had to buy it all over again. And we have in Land Information New Zealand, the big maps of everything was purchased. So then the settlers moved in there and they created farms and they worked extremely hard for all these years. And then John Whiteley, the missionary, doing his Christian duty, wanted to pay ransoms or have ransoms paid and free the Taranaki slaves, the people that Te Wharawharo had captured and taken back to Manukau. And these people were being worked to death, a lot of cannibalism. And anyway, a deal was struck so they could return to Taranaki, but they were to stay to the north of the Waitara River. Well, they got down there, they looked over and saw all these lovely farms, these animals. Ooh, that's not too bad. So then they started causing trouble, and one thing led to another. And then we ended up with Fitzroy, a weak, very, very weak governor who coming in, and he was wishy-washy. Hone Heki saw how wishy-washy he was, so he did his revolt in 1845. Then all sorts of trouble occurred in Taranaki, and the settlers who'd bought a whole lot of land got moved off, and then they had to rebuy it again, and it's a mess. It is a mess. And those people who lost their land after having bought it many times and worked it so hard, no compensation for them.
Which is like the farmers of today, actually. Same thing is happening, just under a different cloak.
So, we can proceed to actually have a look at one of the major glitches of the treaty signing process. And I'll say this, that every document sent out by the government to the treaty assemblies around New Zealand were all in the Maori language, and there were no exceptions to this rule.
There you go.
Right. But something happened. Hobson had his stroke. He returned with Freeman, his secretary, aboard HMS Herald on the 6th of March, 1840. He got carried on a litter to the home of Reverend Davis in Waimate, and he was incapacitated for many, many months and couldn't sign anything with his right hand. He got his ability to sign back within a few months. But Willoughby Shortland, the colonial secretary, had to take over the government. So the first thing Willoughby Shortland did was try to organise the treaty assemblies that were not yet dealt with. One of these was an area of the west coast that was Manukau, Port Waikato, and then Kaffir.
Yeah.
So the Deputy Surveyor General of New Zealand, W.C. Simmons, who was a very literate individual in the Maori language, he had a vocabulary of about 3,000 words. He was good, and he was assigned to take a treaty sheet in Maori to Manukau, Port Waikato, Monsel's mission, and then onwards to Kaffir to the Wesleyan mission down there under Reverend Whiteley. Okay, so he heads on down country, leaving Paihia, I think it was on the 13th of March, and he got to Manukau, and Chief Rewa, who was one of Pompalier's congregation, had rushed down ahead of him and said, don't sign it, because Pompalier seemingly wanted New Zealand to be a French colony rather than an English one. So anyway, poor old W.C. Simmons, he just walked into a brick wall, and he really had very, very little success there. He got no signatures on his first attempt. So he decided to hang around for a little while and hold a second meeting, and he tarried there a little too long, and he held his second meeting and finally managed to get 3 Ngāti Whātua signatures. So now he's got to get all the way through to Monsel at Port Waikato, so he had his boat taken over the portage, I guess, or down the Wairoa River, and then he got to Monsel 3 days too late with the document that he was supposed to bring, which was this document here, which we can bring up on screen. That's called the Kaffir Treaty, that one. I don't know if I'm speaking in the mic.
Yeah, no,
okay.
It's the mic. That's okay.
Yeah.
We'll bring that up.
Okay, we can bring that up. Somewhere. There it is on screen. Yeah, okay. So that's the one.
We're putting him through the ringer again, Martin.
Yeah, we're doing it to them. Okay, so that's the one that Reverend Robert Monsell was supposed to use, all in the Maori language, because that was the only language that he was allowed to present the treaty in. If he did not have that text, he was not allowed to make a presentation. But thankfully for Monsell, he had this text, which is a copy of the printed Maori.
Nope, wrong one. There we go.
And there it is. These had been printed, 200 of them, on the CMS Mission Press on the 17th of February 1840 by Reverend Colenso, the mission printer. And that is the text that was the authorised text that had to be presented to anybody gathered in who needed to, hear the Treaty of Waitangi. Okay, so Monsell, he had 1,500 Maori gathered in. They were having a hui there, a business hui of the different tribes, and he had to take advantage of this in order to make his treaty presentation. Yeah, so that's what he presented to the Maori people gathered in. And it was accepted very well. They wanted to sign. They wanted to cede sovereignty to Queen Victoria, live under those laws, sit in the shadow of the Queen and be protected. There'd been a huge amount of murder and mayhem across New Zealand. They were sick of it. All of the interwars between the different tribes, they wanted an end to it all. They'd had over 20 years of it under Hongi Hika and all of those other groups. So going back to what actually happened at Port Waikato, here's Maunsell. His sheet doesn't arrive. He's got to innovate. He's got to come up with something or he's going to miss a marvellous opportunity. So he's got the text, not a problem. Okay, so he read that to them, and they came forward and began to sign. But unfortunately, at the bottom is only that much room. Are you able to take that up?
So we can see the signatures at the bottom. Yep, there it is.
Very good. So only 5 chiefs were able to sign the document. And Maunsell, he didn't have much space either, so over in the end, over at the side, he crammed in his name, signed sort of before me, R. Maunsell. Okay, so we know that Maunsell read all this to them, to this group, and he put his signature on it. But there were more chiefs who wanted to come forward and sign. So what was he going to do? Well, it just so happened that James Stewart Freeman, who really, really loved the hard work that he put into his memorial document before it got ruined by Hobson's tortured signature, that document had plenty of room on it. So it was put on the table as the repository of overflow signatures. The actual wording on it had no relevance whatsoever. I mean, he could have put any piece of paper on the table. I guess he chose that one because it looked quite impressive and, it was a very auspicious occasion or what. Yep. But anyway, it just became the repository of the overflow signatures. Okay, so he's had a very successful bout with his Treaty Assembly. He's got 5 signatures on the one document.
That everyone agreed to?
That everyone agreed to. This is all they heard, just that. They heard what they were supposed to hear. And then there was another overflow of 32 signatures managed to get on the other sheet.
Yeah.
So he had a total of 37 signatures. Okay, so Maunsell's too late. At least W.C. Symonds is too late with his document. And he sees that Maunsell's had tremendous success. And he initially was going to carry on further south and go and see Reverend Whiteley. But then when he looked at the signatures that he had on hand, he thought, well, all of the paramount or major chiefs of the area have already signed all the way down to Kaffir. So, look, I should send this document that I brought down to Reverend Whiteley, and I should grab this make-do treaty by Maunsell, return to Manukau, and this list of signatures will so impress them that they will want to sign the treaty, this treaty, on my third attempt. And so that's what he did. The document was sent by Maunsell down to Kaffir, that is the one that Symonds had arrived with. So he headed back to Manukau, and he had another go there, and he managed to get another 7 signatures. So that was the best he could do. So he's got 10 signatures that he has gotten himself, in his incentive. So then what he does is he's got to put the 2 pieces of paper that were Maunsell's make-do treaty. He had to put them together into a document or into a pouch and send them back to Hobson. Now, there are fold lines in these documents. we can see them clearly. So what you do is you fold on the fold lines.
Yep.
And you get to find out that one was folded perfectly into that one for carrying it, you know. Yep. So there's nothing that, it's not, I haven't got it fully in there, but it just fits perfectly.
Yep.
So, and then when the documents did get back to Hobson, they weren't the authentic documents of, Willoughby Shortland, sent out by Willoughby Shortland for use there. But he could see that the chiefs had wanted to cede sovereignty to Queen Victoria. They had put down their wish. It had all been witnessed by Maunsell and Ashwell, the other missionary who was there. And so Hobson then attached seals, and he made it so that it was now recognised as a make-do document that would go into the dossier of documents. So what we've got to prove, and what the grievance industry don't want to have known,
nitty-gritty,
is that two pieces of paper were used together at Port Waikato. And we can prove that they were used together in many, many ways, even forensically now. But what we could do, I don't know if we can move on. We have a little, we'll see it when we see the video, I suppose. What W.C. Symonds says to Hobson is that he is I am submitting to Your Excellency upwards of 40 signatures. Okay, 40 signatures and upwards of that, so more than 40 signatures. Right, okay. So if Maunsell only used, as the grievance industry says, the very defective English sheet, well, it's got, by the time Symonds had added 7 more signatures on his third try at Manukau, we have a total of 39 signatures. So we have less than 40 signatures. But if we include the other one with 5 signatures on it,
we have
there was a part of that, we have 44 signatures. And so even the writing of W.C. Symonds verifies that the two documents were used together.
Perfect. And there's also other forensic evidence, isn't there?
Right.
With the pinholes.
So what that actually means is the English sheet that is the darling of the grievance industry is utterly illegitimate. It was not read to the crowd, which makes sense. Like if I was going to be considering a treaty, I wouldn't want to go along and read something in Cantonese.
Yeah. Look at that. Can you hold it up?
Can you hold the one up that you're talking about?
This one here.
The one that the grievance industry uses.
Okay, the darling. Okay, yep. All right, I'll
hold your water for you.
Don't you take my water.
Pump.
Okay.
Sponsorship. No?
Here it is. That's it at full size. That's how big these pieces of paper were.
Imagine rolling the doobie in that.
Yep, and so, okay, there's the terrible tortured signature that Hobson put on it, which rendered it an absolute waste of time and had to be thrown away. Otherwise, it would reflect upon Hobson's ability to carry on and become governor of New Zealand. It's been many, many years, and I'd hate to try it out now, but I used to do translation work. And I know if something is stated on that line, then that's what you put on this line. You may have to change parts of speech to make it sound correct to the native speaker. You know, there's that kind of thing that you might have to do. but technically, line by line by line, it will read the same, and you will end up with approximately the same word weight per sentence. The whole idea, the whole incentive, it seems, of Maturata totally replaced our treaty wording. We have only one treaty in the Maori language, and it is internationally recognised as the only treaty wording. But it's been completely tampered with. It's been pushed into the shadows. At least the Maori one's been pushed into the shadows. It's not consulted.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
The principles have been brought in.
Gee, sound like you're in university.
Absolutely, that's it.
But this is the crux of the matter now.
No, the crux of the matter is this. Excuse us while we have this little debate here. Is that what people have got to realise? It's the Māori one, Māori text only that was ever read to the people. The English one was simply just while they're drafting what they will put into the Māori one to explain to people what's going to happen. That's how it worked. It was so it doesn't matter even if the Littlewood Treaty went missing at the time, the Māori translation, if done properly, will still equate to the same. It's they decided, oh, look, we've got no English one, it's gone missing. This is what it really means over here, which is not the translation or literal translation at all. And that's where your grievance started. And that's where the racism started. And that's when it's projection.
Mm-hmm.
When you want to blame someone else for what you're doing, you project. And that's exactly what's happened. So while we're all being called for everything under the sun, it's actually, if you want to take kinds, your kinds that stuffed it up, not ours.
What it is,
Okay, you can be quiet now.
It was reinterpreting everything. So they're reinterpreting the lot. They've got this thing, they're muddying the waters. They've got these strange, convoluted arguments about what this means and what that means, whereas it was once clear. And so, yes, they brought in these principles, which are totally indefinable. And when they brought them in initially, I think it was Winston Peters and many others said, we don't want that in our legislation.
Yep.
So, yeah, Winston used to be very, very good.
We're going to bring up a couple of articles now for people to have a look.
Yeah, that's good. So when the Littlewood document came back into the public arena, what happened is I managed to get an article into Investigate magazine, and that was in 2003, December, and that flowed over into the issue, of January 2004, same issue. Right after that, Don Brash made his Orewa speech. Then, shortly after that, Winston Peters stood up in Parliament and he said, we've got to start using the Littlewood Treaty because it was the last one that was made as our authority when we're doing like English interpretations of the Treaty of Waitangi. So this article was written by Audrey Young, and I believe it was 3 times within the article he mentioned Littlewood Treaty. But Ian Wishart had said on his Talkback radio show at the time that his colleagues had said to him that they were absolutely forbidden to mention the words Littlewood Treaty in any of the media programs or, so that was a real taboo. You weren't allowed to do it. But obviously Audrey Young slipped up. She quoted Winston completely. And so we'll go to the next one, go down a little bit. That text about the Littlewood Treaty went out to the Bay of Plenty and in the first edition. Then another lady comes whipping in to do damage control, Helen Tuna, and she goes through it and she strips out all references to the Littlewood Treaty and turns what had been a totally dynamic article into a very sterile one. I mean, here was a major parliamentarian saying that the text that we were using at the time was illegitimate and needed to be replaced, and that we need to consult the final English draft or the Littlewood Treaty.
And there it is.
And it's been very, very hard to get word about this document found in 1989 out into the public arena. We've had to fight very, very hard. We get no help whatsoever from the academics.
Why is that? Why? You've actually had a running battle with a couple of them.
Well, I've had a running battle with a lot of them.
Yeah, because it seems that they have certain go-tos, what we call go-tos, whenever something has to be substantiated by, on behalf of government. They bring out a willing, useful idiot to come and say, yes, that's right, because I have these credentials.
I call them rent-a-pricks.
Yeah, but then that would be a pretty apt description, actually.
So when they want to sway public opinion, they trot out somebody who's considered to be a great expert of everything, and this person gives the appropriate opinion that the government wants.
It's like Ashley Bloomfield and his safe and effective jabs.
Uh-huh.
You're not allowed to talk about hydroxychloroquine. You're not allowed to talk about ivermectin, anything like that. They sort of get rid of that and censor that. But you can talk about COVID-19, the pandemic that never got started, never got out the starting block.
Well, we can actually move on now to one more item. I've set out my article in dirty trick number 1, dirty trick number 2, dirty trick number 3. Nice. And a lot of these are kind of like a sleight of hand magician's trick where, don't look there, look over here.
Like Jacinda, look at my teeth. Don't look at what I'm doing.
Yeah. So what they came up with, another one of their...
We're still trying to find documents.
Okay, so the certified treaty, it's where there was a dispatch that went out from New Zealand in February 1840, and there was an enclosure. It actually ended up being 3 enclosures in this dispatch, I think, in 2 extra ones on the 25th year, and there's another one earlier. But there's another big lie told by the grievance industry, which says or tries to convince New Zealanders that there's something called the Certified Treaty of Waitangi, and it's a tremendous lie. Okay, so it's a rather yellowish copy of a document. I don't know if I've got a copy of it here, based on a microfilm.
So while they're looking for that, give us a bit of a rundown on the type of attacks you've had.
That's it there.
Oh, here we go. Let's just go straight back into it then.
Right.
We'll do my little story later.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very, very interesting.
It was going to prompt you for one, actually, but it's okay.
Okay, well...
We'll even make it bigger.
Yeah, now this is only the last page of this document, all written by James Stuart Freeman, and it's one of his formal royal-style copies that he's sending in this dispatch. Right, so you get a bit further down and the formal royal-style text comes to an end, and then, they're doing something to conserve paper, which I guess was a pretty high-priced commodity in those days. And so he enters into a business section and he tells Governor Sir George Gipps or Lord Normanby, whoever got it, that 52 chiefs have signed up further north and then another 78. So he's submitting word that another 130 chiefs have signed the treaty. Then he goes down a bit further and he writes this, he says, the wording, if you can bring it up a little bit bigger. Yeah, so he's certifying that this is as literal a translation as the idiom of language will admit of, I think are his words. And then you've got signed Henry Littlewood. What the grievance industry don't tell you is Williams, the text further up, Henry Williams, sorry, what are we doing? Okay.
It's right, we're just keeping fact and evidence-based.
Yeah, getting late. Okay.
Yeah, well, this is the second part. People don't realise we've been here all day.
So the text above wasn't written by Henry Williams, the official translator. It was written by James Stewart Freeman. That's his handwriting.
All right.
So he's provided a space for Henry Williams to certify his work.
Yeah.
Okay. So the grievance industry says, see, even Henry Williams himself has certified that this is the treaty wording, and as close as the idiom of language will allow. And
Ridiculous,
but,
eh?
Okay, but there are other things that were sent in this enclosure. So if you go back to some of the other pages, I can hold. Okay, that one there. Okay, if that can be brought up, the Maori one. Okay, you can expand that one perhaps. The Maori one, yeah, that
boy.
one. If you can expand it a bit, I don't know if you can.
Yeah,
But that is
pretty good.
a handwritten copy of Treaty of Waitangi by the translator, Reverend Henry Williams, handwritten for the archives of, he sent them to various locations. One was sent to Clendon, another one went in this dispatch overseas and ended up either with Sir George Gipps or with Lord Normanby in England, to go into their files. But not only that, he also, in the dispatches, or the dispatch of the 25th of February 1840, sent 3 of these. I think it was 3. I've got 2 of them listed on my website, but I think there were 3. And
Yep, 3 of those. That's the one. Well, we got it. Woo-hoo.
Right, you got it. Wow.
We're doing it now.
So now we know what Reverend Henry Williams was certifying. He wasn't certifying this defunct text by James Stewart Freeman. He was certifying his own work, his own translation. And a bit earlier on, somewhere in there, we had a picture of Ruth Ross. Ruth Ross went through to try and analyse all of these formal royal-style treaty documents, and she had to come to the conclusion that none of these were ever used to create Te Treaty of Waitangi, and Te Treaty of Waitangi was never used to create any of them. And she had to conclude that Reverend Henry Williams and his son Edward Marsh Williams had used an altogether different treaty text, now lost.
Wow.
And she passed away, unfortunately, a number of years before the finding of the Littlewood document in 1989. But if she had have seen that, or if she had have been able to find a lot of the documents that were missing in the enclosures, or if she had have been able to see what Clendon sent on the 20th of February 1840, or what Wilk sent on the 6th of April, it was the 3rd of April, 6th of April, 1840, she would have understood exactly what had happened.
You've got an impressive recall. You've been munching on those ginkgo leaves, have you?
Yeah.
Can't remember what I had for breakfast.
How does it fit in with the pinhole, and how can you prove, without a doubt, that those 2 documents are part of the same?
Yeah. Okay. Well, what it is, I'm not able to necessarily write directly to archives. I have a reputation apparently, and some doors that get closed on me. Although archives at the time when I was writing my book, they were very nice. They gave me all of the watermarks. They actually got a light box, and they got the documents and they put them on the light box and put pages on that, and showed me all of the watermarks of the paper that Hobson was using, the paper that James Stewart Freeman was using, the paper that Busby was using in their portfolios, these ones. Yes, absolutely wonderful. And also
That's
the
initiative
document
right there.
The document that Clendon, the paper that Clendon was using, he was the only one in New Zealand that was using it, that the Littlewood document ended up being written on. So anyway, so they were very good in their time for a while. But what we needed was I needed to see the rear side of the printed sheet. Not the front side, but the rear side at very high resolution. Okay.
Yep, there it is.
Yeah. So what I needed to see, because I knew it had happened, was that this one had been wax glued to that one at some point, and I wanted to see when it was ripped away from there, whether fibre damage had occurred between the two sheets, like if this sheet had shared some of its fibres with that one and vice versa,
yep,
or any paste glue or any pinholes where they were put together. Anyway, my colleague, Serenity, well,
that's a shout out right there.
Yeah. Anyway, wrote to the archives and basically asked for this information under an official information request, and we ended up getting it.
After how long?
It was something like 6 months. So what we then did, I got my son, who's very, very good on the computer, to take both sheets, because we were also supplied with all of the work that had been done on the treaty sheets right back to the 1980s, and I think even beyond that, showing every pinhole, every mar, every tear, and also the exact, absolutely exact dimensions of the sheets themselves. So these were taken into Photoshop by my son, who then sized them absolutely perfectly. Then, using high-resolution imagery supplied by archives, we were able to pick up on the holes and all of the kind of the damage, and show positively that there was shared fibre damage. But the main thing that we saw was how a big long stick pin had gone through one area, stuck to both sheets together, and there was absolutely perfect damage and holes on the front sheet and the back sheet. And so, yeah, we were able to prove that they had been stick pinned together. And based on that information, I got in contact with Peter Dunn, who was then head of archives, and formally requested that they do a full forensic analysis on these sheets, because we now knew positively that the two of them were joined together. And if the two of them were joined together, then the entire grievance industry philosophy and argument absolutely evaporates.
Falls to pieces. We're going to take a dramatic pause here while that sinks into people's heads. Think of everything you've gone through, all the angst, all the arguments, all the protests, all the riots, all the attacks.
Yeah, the ad hominem attacks, you get plenty of them, but yep, it doesn't worry me at all. If the ad hominem attacks ever stopped, then I would know that I wasn't being effective, or that, gosh, I better, get into the play again.
Hang on, we're about to get another interjection. I thought I'd just announce it before it comes instead of just getting the old fight across the starboard.
I've got another question.
Talk louder, because this is the microphone here.
We are all one people?
We are all one people. We are all British subjects under, well, Queen Elizabeth now. We're part of the Commonwealth, of course, and, yeah, we are all one people. That's in the original document.
And the Littlewood.
Everything says that there are no special customary rights or anything that apply to one group over another.
That doesn't apply to the other. Yep.
Yeah, everybody is absolutely equal under the law. There are no second-class citizens. We're absolutely the same. We are all British subjects altogether. Yeah, so I do believe that there's been a huge amount of international interference, and a lot of it has come through the UN. Back in the early days there, when Maturata was looking at all sorts of future possibilities, one thing that he really loved was, I think it was called at the time, DUNDRIP, Draft United Nations Rights for Indigenous People.
Yep.
And I believe it's now UNDRIP. The draft part of it's been dropped off it, and it's now a reality. And the UN uses that as a means for breaking up countries. And I think there's been a huge amount of foreign interference.
Without doubt.
They've stripped away our sovereignty, and they've stripped away our future. They've gobbled up our resources that used to be owned by the New Zealand public. Yep, they've left the country in pretty much tatters.
And all they had to do was divide us. It's an
Divide and
age-old
rule.
tactics. Yep, an age-old tactic that's worked. Well, why would they change it? It keeps working, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All I've got to say is, hey, Martin, that bloke over there is trying to take your shit. And then I go to that bloke and say, hey, Martin's trying to take your stuff. Then all of a sudden, you two are fighting for God knows what reason.
Uh-huh.
And while you're fighting, like us, about issues of no real importance, they're carving up the country and selling it off to their mates.
Yeah, it's sort of like something directly out of the Marxist playbook. Divide and rule, find a dissident little group who've got a gripe and then play them against somebody else and get division going.
And they don't realize they're the useful idiots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because they will,
that's right.
because they will be, you, whoever this applies to out there, you will be dispensed with as quick as you got started, as soon as you've brought them to the part of the agenda that they want.
Yep.
They've done it throughout history.
Yep.
That's the big 5-minute sign there. We don't have like electronics or anything that says 5-minute countdown. It's just, 5.
Uh-huh.
There we go.
Yeah, so I believe it's all well proven, whether you look at the paper trail, which is absolutely complete, all the way back to Hobson, all of the criteria to do with the final English draft found in 1989 is absolutely impeccable. We've caught them out perpetrating an immense fraud.
Yes.
And all of their sleight of hand tricks and all of their red herrings to guide us off the path, it's all exposed now. If our authorities would finally do the forensic work and check out the paper trail.
It's funny how forensics audits are the thing of the day.
Uh-huh.
That seems to be uncovering everything.
Absolutely,
Elections in the US,
the United
everything.
States, yeah.
Forensics, fact and evidence don't lie.
That's right.
So, in keeping with Counterspin's fact and evidence-based programming, Counterspin and Martin Dutray, more you, we're just trying to jump on your coattails, challenge anyone out there, any of you academics that have either tried to take Martin apart in the past, because I've seen some of the interviews you've done with him where you've chopped and changed it and tried to make him look like an idiot, yet he's got more intelligence and fact in his little finger than you'll have in your whole body. So if you want to come and debate that, you let us know. Stop just being mass debaters everywhere else. Come here and do it. See how I slipped that in?
Yeah, you did. It was very clever.
And now that I've asked you that, now they get what I was actually saying. I just want to punctuate that point. So once again, we're right, you're wrong. So we are one people. By the time we got over ourselves and actually got this country back to where it should be. A hell of a good country.
Yep.
Go to www.celticnewzealand.co.nz. Again, everything we've talked about here is in print. You can read it over and over and over again. You can reference these shows, comedy routines and all. Under articles 1 and 2, part 1 and 2, yeah, at the top. You will find this particular. Sorry, I'm just taking instructions at the same time. We haven't got any earpieces. And we'll definitely have him back on shortly, because as we promised, we're going to also bring a real history of New Zealand. We will bring the facts and evidence, archives and all about who was really here first. Not to sort of get one over you or own you or anything like that, but just to sort of start getting rid of the official narrative and bringing the truth. And once we understand the past, we're not likely going to let someone else divide us anymore. Because let's face it, we all got on pretty well, eh? We're all like little caramellos now.
Yeah, when I was very young, and that's a hell of a long time ago, working as a carpenter
Like
isolated hamlets, in full Maori communities, on full Maori work gangs, we were getting on like a house on fire. The Maori boys, they were pretty rough and ready. In areas where I worked, you had most of the truckers. They loved big trucks and machinery. The bulldozer drivers and
bloody good workers too.
Yeah, they were hard workers, and we were fine. And they took good care of me. I was just a snotty-nosed little 17-year-old kid, but they took real good care of me, and we were all really good mates in those days. But it's really a shame to see how much we've been divided.
Yeah, and the fact that you're here to give this story and to prove the fraud that's been perpetrated proves that they've got over their cannibalistic ways and you survived.
Yeah, well, they were good mates there, but something treacherous happened to us, and the group came along and stabbed us in the back, and caused all of this animosity that didn't exist before. It was a situation when I was young where we couldn't understand racist stuff in the United States and that,
Yeah.
And we couldn't even understand these comedies about the British class system. It just fell on deaf ears. The Brits thought it was really funny, the lower class and the upper class, and we couldn't get it.
We're actually moving into full
really
class and
together
warfare now, aren't we?
New Zealand. And not only that, when they started hatching all of this nonsense back in 1974 and that, with the marching of the Polynesian Panther Party, the New Zealand Returned Servicemen's Association came out and put out a whole page ad saying, please don't do this to us. We've been comrades in arms through 2 world wars. We don't have this problem.
That's right.
We've been getting along just fine.
And that's the problem, the fact we were getting on, and that's what they don't like.
Yeah, and they said in the article, racism is something that's created by talking about it.
Yep.
And after that, there were Maori vets who had also served in the forces overseas during the Second World War, who came forward and said, please don't do this to us.
Yeah.
But the rabble-rousers and the hotheads and all of the brats who figured they knew a hell of a lot better than all of the adults, they did it to us.
I don't think I can follow that. I've got nothing even funny to say. Producer, what should we do next?
Well, I just say, stay united, New Zealand. Don't let the bastards divide us. Thanks for coming, and we'll catch you all again soon.
Yeah, okay then.
That was actually pretty
good
good.
one.